work better. What were you thinking about the outside resolution?
Well, I consider the outside resolution as being the judge.
Oh, okay. Okay.
But I don't know.
And so the panel itself then would not pass the board, it would go directly to turn it over to the board?
Oh, no, it would have to go through the board. Isn't that how the structure that you presented that
It
night?
is, but I was thinking this was an alternative, so I just wanted to make sure I understood that you're keeping that structure, that part of it, is that.
Oh, well, we can decide
Okay.
if that's,
Okay.
you know.
Okay.
Can I ask a question? I remember when we were talking at the last meeting, and somebody said, why? I think it was Don Hoyle, and he said, why? I'm just trying to think in my mind about the town here, and of course I can think of my own places because they're on my list of things to do. Cook mentioned to me, he said, can I spray poison along your fence row over here by the lift station? Because the multiflora have got into it and it was scratchy and stuff, and of course, anybody knows how I feel about putting poison on the land, then they'll kind of know. I said, so then I have since worked on that, just that one day, because I've got a lot of things that I'm trying to keep done. But if you notice there, around my gate, and over there, we've cut out a major bunch. I had some help. Mr. Worley helped. My renter helped. Appreciated their help and stuff, but it's not like I didn't know that was there, but maybe fallen trees, that dead tree removal, different things. So you kind of have your own agenda. You can't do everything all at once, and you can't afford to have everything done. So that was a situation where somebody mentioned this. Would it be all right if I did this to your property? No, let me take care of it. And I made an effort to do something there, and it does look better, and there's still room for improvement, but I'm waiting till some things die off to get in there and do it. And I'm just thinking, when I think about the town, there's a lot of places, like I've mentioned to Cook, one of these days I put it on hold, but it's like, do you mind if I come over here and cut all these low branches off right here so that you can get your thing around it? Because around the trees, and I don't know who owns that property, but Cook mows it. He said, yeah, just stack it up so I can push it down. I'll stack it up. I'll get on my loader and haul it off. Excluding that I have branches behind my building up here that's on my list to do too, things to do, and I'm constantly doing what you can do in your spare time. But I just think about the town. I know Allison took some pictures around town we were looking at. It was like, oh my gosh, these should be in some National Geographic magazine. It looks beautiful here. I've always had a little bit of it. It's like, we have the park up here, not to mention names, but there's people that have bunches of equipment, but maybe it's their livelihood. Maybe they should do a little cleaning up. I know when I talked to Hickenback, not to name names again, but his neighbor, the weeds were up, horse weeds were up to the top of their thing, and that, I don't know, maybe some people just stay in their house and don't look at their yards and go out very frequently. But when you go around the town, I might have a blind eye, but there's not a lot of really terrible, we're a little village of offensive things. And I know that Natalie had mentioned this place down here, clear on around the corner.
What's your point?
That I don't know what it is that what is the major violations that we're so concerned about in this town? Of course, there was empty vacant lots and that.
Well, if we don't have anything that's in violation, there would be no enforcement needed, right? So it
Right.
would be moot, and that's what I think you're saying. So
Well,
if we like the ordinances and we think that they should be enforced and there aren't any violations, then there's no enforcement to be done.
No, like Oil said, if they're, and they're not worth the paper they're written on, if there's not an avenue for enforcement. And as I as I go around the town, and when I first moved here, when I moved here versus living in a place in Coffee, the difference I saw between Jameson and Coffee was Jameson cared. I could tell that just by going around. Not all the properties were perfect, but you could tell that people cared. And there's a difference between having a property that does have some weeds and things like that, but are slowly being taken care of versus neglected.
Right.
There's a different, if you're working on a project, you don't have enough time to get it done, but you can see that there's somebody that actually gives it on and is working on the project. That's not, to me, that is not something that is an infraction or needs to be addressed. But what do we do when we have problems if there's no avenue of enforcement or path to follow on those? There may be nothing for years. That means great. Nothing to enforce, nothing to worry about, nothing to have. Panel could have a cup of coffee if there was. They wanted to get together just to remember who else on the panel.
So if there was no problem, if there's no problems in the community, then what was the big drive to hire an enforcement officer?
I don't know. I
It seemed to me that
inherited.
a couple of people on the committee had a big drive to hire an enforcement officer right off the bat when we became aware of what was going on.
Of the town board members? the
Yeah,
town board-
that's kind of why I asked the time thing, that was my
I
question.
mean, it was, right now, we have to do this. Why right now do we have to do this?
Lorraine, you've been patiently holding up your hand.
In a town about the size of Gallatin, I was the inspector of houses. And I could say, you're going to have to destroy it or correct it. But the person could talk with me about it. It may take a year, to get one of them squared away. But there were some that I said, if you can't do anything with it, then we're going to have to destroy it. And then it couldn't be destroyed until it was talked over by the elected officials. And I had to have good reasons for destroying it. But I got about 5 of them destroyed, and a whole bunch of the citizens around where those were went, yay! We got rid of that dog, And one of them, the town ended up paying the person for the property. He didn't want to keep it after his house that his great-grandpa had built. But it was a collapsed mess. Couldn't start a fire.
So that's an example of a community that had ordinances and had someone enforce it and got things done that the community
Yeah,
appreciated.
we didn't ever go to court ever on the things. We just went through discussions, except for the house where the town paid for it, the property.
Okay. So there's an example of where it worked.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So that's a big town, but it's like Gallatin compared to Jameson size.
Okay. Thank you.
I realize we've come to these ordinances late. You guys have worked on them for, how long have you been on the board? Both of
Since
you?
2011 is when they
2
started.
years,
I just
okay.
started it.
So you've worked on them 2 years, right?
I personally,
Yeah.
yeah.
So we've kind of, like I say, we've come to the ordinances late. They've been established, they've been examined,
Yeah, they were
voted
worked on for a lot of years before I got
Right.
before I retired and moved here and got on the board. But, so
So-
yeah, they've been around.
I can hear people saying, well, why do we have to have them in the first place? Why do we have to enforce them? Unfortunately, we're at the place where that's where we've arrived to. Now, we have the town, people in the town have said, let's, and I hate to say this, let's go back over those ordinances and see if we really need them. Isn't that kind of what I'm hearing you say? If we're not going to enforce it, let's not have it.
Yeah, that's a bad law. If it's,
Yeah.
and I think that's where a lot of the objections are coming in, is people think that there's some bad ordinances out there. If the ordinances were gone over and corrected, and I think there'd be a little more support in having some kind of enforcement. But
That's a good point.
I don't know.
So I heard you say, if we're not going to enforce it, we shouldn't have it. Is that what
Yeah.
you said? And the way to,
Or if it needs something, there
Yeah,
are
that's
some
what I was trying
bad
to write
laws.
down.
Yeah. There's some ordinances that are bad. And
are they?
we're sorry to say that to the town board, but you passed a
Well,
bad
yeah.
ordinance.
Hey, we're new. We're the new.
Right, and we're
man.
not pointing fingers.
Well,
That's why I say
she's
we've
new and
come,
I'm the newest,
we've come
and-
to this late,
Right.
and shame on us for doing that.
But the impression that a lot of people have is that an outsider came in and it's like, here you go, and the board just rubber stamped it, and that was it, without any real thoughts or communication with the community. And I think that kind of rubs people the wrong way.
I agree that that's the impression that a lot of people have. And I think impressions can be held, everybody has a different impression of everything. And so just because it's someone's impression doesn't make it so. It doesn't
But the
make it not so
reality is
either.
that none of the ordinances were actually written here.
It's just like Brent was saying last week. We were here, many of us were here at the previous meeting, so we heard the whole meeting. We were here on record, but then we show up the next meeting, and I think I don't know if it's illegal to do it or whatever, but somewhere there had been some discussion on at least two things because magically we had two ordinances. One was the forested, the wooded area, and that wasn't discussed in the previous meetings at all, but then that we actually had a handwritten ordinance ready to vote on. So somewhere someone had to have had some kind of a discussion on that wasn't at a board meeting.
No, that was discussed at the meeting prior.
Prior to that.
Okay, but then
She was asked to draft that. Yeah.
Okay, she drafted that. The next one was, of course, Dave's volunteering to be the other, and we didn't. I mean,
I'll be the first to say that did get taken
Yeah, that was just.
further than what it was supposed to, because it was my last word to Patty was, these are all great ideas. Let's discuss them in the board meeting.
And I would say to you that the three other board members, there are five of us, one and Patty and the other three had no idea that had happened. So
I
there's not
noticed
a
that.
kind of consensus of, meeting outside or sunshine law issue because it hadn't been discussed with the board.
Right.
It had to have been discussed somewhere.
But we've gone over.
I mean, if you look at the
this,
transcripts from the
guys.
meeting before that, and then you look at what Patty presented right off the bat at that meeting, the two, there's a gap there.
But she
I don't
did
have my phone. I
apologize too.
And
So,
I can tell you where it came from. She had sent me a note about volunteering, and if I would be a volunteer. And my last words to her was, yeah. I mean, I would love to be a volunteer and possibly have some help, and we can discuss that at the board meeting. Then we all show up at the board meeting, and Patty, and she apologized for it, had taken the ball and just ran.
And she said so at
With
the
it,
end.
and she
Okay.
wa- and
All
she-
up at arm. She said, I
Yeah.
did it because I thought that's what you wanted. That was going to
Yeah.
be
Which is
happy. And I
static.
thought, well, she didn't.
Did
she didn't talk to me.
Did she email that to you?
Well, yeah, I think I have it. I can't. I had my phone in my van when I came up in the power chair, but
Could you forward that to me?
yeah, if I've got it, if I can
All right.
find it. Well,
so
I've got your email.
if I might.
Yeah, Brent.
Okay,
at
bringing us
Yahoo.
back on task,
Okay.
we've got two suggestions here.
Yep.
This one, and not at all.
well,
Well,
I don't know about not at all. I mean, here's one because that I see the betterment is taking it out of the betterment. I don't attend the betterment meetings anymore, but I know that there's a lot of people that don't actually live in the town limits or something. I think that come to that, the Neely or whoever comes to that, the Dooleys. Well, they got property here, but whatever. I don't think, and Dave, I don't know what he does outside, but he seems to have time because he could do that. He's volunteered to do that, and he needed some help. Another member of the community, maybe not even somebody on the board, because the board's expressed a desire not to be the ones to do it, but I wouldn't have a problem with going over and saying, hey, everybody's kind of unhappy with the way your place looks, or,
well, I'm not.
you need some help?
Excuse me.
Go ahead.
Well, the betterment thing is just kind of out of left field for me because it's we have a betterment person on there because they then could volunteer the services of betterment to clean this up when really maybe this property owner that needs to clean it up
Oh,
instead
no,
of
not
having that.
first, no, it would be the property
Burn an
owner. It
old
would-
house that made-
The person, what do we want to say that person is? The property owner,
Well, if we're talking about property issues, I don't know what to call it.
yeah, I don't know if it could, the dog owner.
The owner.
Right.
What,
Okay, the owner, that's fine.
how do we want to identify that person? The violator. That even sounds terrible. The violator. Yeah, the violator, I guess that's what the panel would decide is, well, the violator can take care of this.
And how would that be different than having an ordinance enforcement officer, whether it was a volunteer, and a single person, one person instead of a panel of three who then
Well, I don't know
have to.
that if you had, let's say this person from out of town, are they gonna be able to go to the Betterment Committee and say, could you handle this for this person?
Well, it doesn't have to be a person from out of town. I mean,
Okay.
one of the people
Yeah,
applied,
okay.
Talked with us, but, yeah. There's some process built into the ordinance that I think is useful, it's how
Okay.
you sort of get a verbal warning, a written warning, and all that, and so forth. There's a sequence of steps
Yes.
that can be, have the rule of ordinance with it, the power of the ordinance with it, a
Right.
process, where if this all sounds like, the first step is, well, will you do something about it? And if the answer is no, then I guess the answer is no, and then it goes back to following the other ordinances. And I know this is just a draft, and I'm just trying to figure out how this is
Yeah,
gonna work.
how-
There's
that's
having
what
some
I would like,
structure, makes it fair for the person who is violating, or the owner, or whatever we're saying, because you don't know what to say. Well, these people just showed up and said, I got a complaint, somebody complained about me, and I don't even know what this is about. That doesn't set people off on the right foot very well.
Oh, I agree.
Doesn't have a great attitude about
So-
it.
How many, if we were, say we were the committee, we're gonna go around town, and we were talking about hiring somebody that's gonna put in 10 to 20 hours a month to look at things from outside, how many, what kind of violation are we talking about? How long would it take to turn around and look at the things that need to be improved here? I just don't see that. I think it's a pretty little community. I've always loved it. As I live in here, of course, I say if I go some other street, maybe somebody's got a bunch of clutter there that I don't have to look at daily or whatever. If I did, if they next door to me, maybe I just build a fence so I didn't have to see it. Or maybe I would show up with my brush cutter and say, hey, can I help you cut this down? It's bigger, and be neighborly and help somebody with something. I've offered to help Mr. Worley multiple times, but no,
Thank you,
he's going to
Mary.
build.
That's kind of what I was thinking of with the Betterment Committee, rather than say to the person, well, you need to clean this up. The Betterment, yeah,
But you know who's on Betterment? Betterment's made up of volunteers
exactly.
who have their
Exactly.
own properties they're taking care of.
Right.
And while I believe that the Betterment organization, Community Betterment, is eager to do that and willing to do that, but when it becomes an expectation, it doesn't feel quite so good.
Right.
That,
Oh, well,
somebody
no.
has the
Okay,
wherewithal
and I understand what
to
you're
do
saying,
that.
and it wouldn't be an expectation. It would simply be, okay, we've got this situation here, this violation.
Mhm.
Can the Betterment Committee help with it? Well, no, I don't think we can. It's beyond us. See, that kind of thing. Where the board would say, can the board figure out what to do with this? No, they can't.
So this
How about
person,
citizens? Can you pull Yeah, I think the citizens can pull together and take care of this problem.
and then that committee pulls them together to get it taken care of?
Or
Well,
somebody on the
And
committee.
that would be if the person with the violation
Yeah.
can't handle their own violation. Maybe people just don't care about their trash and the way their place looks, because there are people like that don't try to improve anything.
Okay,
They're-
so
it's
then what
obvious.
happens in that case? So now they don't want to do it, and they don't want anybody else messing on their property, coming onto their property to do anything that they don't see as necessary.
Well, that would be, then the board would have to decide what to do with that.
Well, that's where I think an enforcement, I am off put by the word officer, but an enforcement official would need to step in. And not seeing that, happening often at all. Even, like I said, when I moved here, I drove through and I saw Mr. Worley's property. I saw some different properties that weren't the same as everybody else's. But one thing I did notice was that the man took care of his property. He did everything, in his efforts to make it look nice. And what we're looking at is what happens when the neighbors aren't helping out, and you've got an out-of-state or an absentee owner or whatever. Who's going to be the official to do the paperwork, make the next step?
Well, I think the panel, I don't see any reason why the panel wouldn't be able to. So the board says, Betterment can't, the community can't, so then the panels, or the board says, well, okay, we have to follow these steps. I don't know why the panel couldn't do
I
that.
think that's because there's no way, I mean, you can't enforce it unless you bring in some kind of a right. You don't have the money to take it to court. That's the whole thing, wasn't it? Because you'd have to actually file a complaint and go through some other outside procedures to.
Well, that's one of the steps of the process. That's sort of
Right.
last ditch effort, to try and get them to respond. But there are other steps ahead of that, which I don't know why the enforcement officer, whether it's the volunteer board member or someone else, can't have those same discussions about what do you need? Can we have a work day? Can we do that?
Yeah.
Why there's
Yeah, you
benefit
can have-
from the, and so if the pushback, and I'm just trying to be clear, is the pushback from paying someone and for it being someone from outside, is that really the meat of this?
I heard some horror stories. This is from my accountant who's, rental properties. One was in Winston, different things, but I think this one was actually in Altamont that he had. And his first notice, which whatever happened there, but it's one of the communities that's part of this, was a subpoena. So when he goes to court, then he goes out with the city manager to this property that he owns there. And what he said was there was 7 pieces of trash that had blown up against the fence. But you've got an enforcement officer that's going around looking for something to write up a fine for, because that's your job, type of a thing, and that wasn't, but somehow it fell through the cracks. I can just see like a $500 fine because I didn't get a notice that some tree branch was down someplace or something, so.
I like the idea of it being a complaint-based system instead of somebody going around looking for problems.
I do too.
I have a problem with thinking that somebody's gonna drive up and down the street.
Well, don't we all do that?
Huh?
Don't we
Yeah,
all?
but to look for a problem.
Yeah, but
I mean, if I'm looking for problems, I can find problems.
I mean, if that's this person's
Everywhere.
job, spend 10 hours a month or whatever, driving around here trying to find a problem so they can get paid for doing their job, I have a big problem with it.
I do too.
So,
And because that could happen, I'm going to move from Jameson
And-
out into the country. I don't want anything
Oh,
to
you
do
just
with
got
the
your
town.
contract poured. You
And-
can't
But
do
is
that yet.
Just a second, please. Is that different than a volunteer doing that? A designated person doing that, who's the
They're
volunteer,
not gonna
who's
be
from the
paid for doing
community?
their job.
I like what he said,
That's
like
fine.
Complaint.
would be on a complaint.
Right, and I've got that, I just want,
basis.
I don't want to get into that, I'm just trying to, I'm
Yeah.
still taking notes. So,
If somebody's being paid to do their job, then they're gonna have to find some reason
to exist, to
Earn
justify
their
their
money.
existence.
Earn their money.
Yeah, I understand.
Yeah.
Okay, I got it. So it's not, it's the paying it part, is what
Well,
you're
that's
saying.
part of it, and the fact that.
It's an outsider looking for something, whereas if
Do we
you,
really need
well, even if it's an
somebody driving
insider,
up and down the road
I'm not
that
real
much, looking at
happy
our
with
properties
a
and
paid
finding
position.
something wrong with them?
Okay, yeah.
And when Mrs. Lusk was here with her daughter, and I don't remember when that meeting was, but when her daughter was talking about the ordinance enforcement position, they were talking about how they're going to target certain things first. And to me, that makes it seem like they talked about unlicensed vehicles, going after vehicles like that first, and some other things that they said. So that tells me that they have an idea that there's multiple ordinance infractions already, because they're limiting what they're going after at the beginning, because they can't go after everything.
They don't want to overwhelm everyone with like,
Exactly, and that's the
ordinances
reality
first.
is if you go by the letter of the law and you look at, and if you start looking at like dog violations, there's all kinds of dog violations. There's people that have big dogs that aren't posted, which is a violation of the ordinance. I mean, if you start going down through the ordinances as they're currently written, you could find a violation on nearly every property. And if you have somebody that's paid to go out there and find those, then, I mean, that's their job. They wouldn't be doing their job if they didn't go out there and find those.
Well, even if you had somebody volunteer to go out and find them.
Yeah, and from my perspective, it's like if somebody's got a problem, from my perspective, they should go to the person first. If somebody has a problem with my property, come to me and tell me about it. It's like, hey, you know what? We think that you need to take care of this. And if I say, I'm not going to do anything, then file a complaint with the panel or the board or something like that and let them deal with it at that point. But hiring somebody to go out looking for problems, I mean,
And so, because of the discussion about the targeting certain things first, that comes across as the default position is that violations exist, and I've just got to get out there and find them.
yeah.
Okay, thanks.
Especially when we can't pay our streetlight bill. We're gonna pay somebody else to go around looking for problems, but if nobody has a problem, I mean, I
We have to
don't,
finagle the budget to pay bills.
I mean, I don't even know if Mary or Lori Ann have problems with their property that I could maybe not like, because I haven't really gone nosing around there or looking, but just obvious things.
Yeah,
Yeah, I don't know, that may not have got put in there, but it's on a complaint
yes,
basis.
yeah,
Okay.
yeah. All right, I got that, I guess, for some complaint panel, I guess, maybe the title. Yeah, receive complaints from, so I got that. Yeah.
Okay.
So to summarize what I think we're saying, and I wanted to see if I got it right. Jim, do you want to say anything? You're the only, well, or do you want to say something?
He's
No?
done really good at being quiet.
Okay.
I'm just taking my turn. I'm just doing
So if I were to report on the, and we don't have to have consensus, so I don't know if I want to use that word or not, but the summary of what's been discussed here is the belief is, I think, pretty universal, that paying someone in this position is a bad idea. Is that, anybody disagree with that? Okay. Okay. And the sense is having it done on a complaint basis would be a better thing.
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
But before you want to, as far as
Good. Help me.
complaint basis, I would have a problem, and other people might also, going to someone directly and saying, they have there's a problem with this or whatever. That's why I think with an enforcement official, it would be easier to come to a meeting and versus the whole board, or even one number you could call, say this is the complaint we have. Can you take it before the board? Now-
Can you intercede?
Right.
Before it comes
Right.
over.
That's the way I got my assignment for houses. It's a complaint that the house was.
Yeah. And I believe that there are people in town who will just continually complain, to harass people. And so somebody has to be the in-between for that, I think.
I think so too.
So, okay, so, and then another question that came up is what's the hurry and why now? But I think folks said that if we felt like, and again, don't put words in your mouth, that if it was on a complaint basis and we didn't pay the person, that an alternate solutions or remedies were considered
Yeah, that's.
or offered or something. I mean, is another point that came out of this. Okay, so are there things that I've left